Good afternoon, everyone. We want to welcome you to our webinar today, and we are excited to have John Grant and Jenny Hollingsworth with us from Innovia Consulting, and they are going to be doing their last series on Business Central for Manufacturing 101, and this presentation is going to be all about shop loading. And before I pass it over to John and Jenny to cover on this topic, I just want to remind you that we are recording this session as well as all of our previous recordings, and it will be available for you to review and share with anyone in our on-demand webinar library. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and click on your microphone. I'm going to unmute everyone, and you can ask your questions as we go along, or you can write them in the chat, in the questions box in the chat panel. So John and Jenny would just like to go ahead and discuss your questions as they go along in the presentation. All right, so I'm going to pass it on over to Jenny to kick off our presentation.
All right, thank you, Angie. So as Angie said, we're going to talk about shop loading, all about shop loading today. Talk about the capacities and talk about how to load the capacities. So it's a super exciting topic today. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Jenny Hollingsworth. I'm a senior application consultant here at Innovia Consulting. I've been here almost 15 years, and then prior to that, I was at another partner for 10 years. So I've been working with NAV since, I think, Navision 1.0. So lots of experience in the NAV software. I'll let John introduce himself.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is John Grant, also obviously at Innovia. I'm also a senior application consultant. I've been at Innovia, I don't know, 11 years, I think, something like that. I've had a chance to work on several other different ERP products. AX, if you're familiar with that. I actually did a little bit of Great Plains, Sightline made to manage, and some probably forgotten the names of. M1 was an interesting one, but and I'm a super lean proponent. Get a chance to anybody on a lean journey. I'm 100% sold on it, and in our implementations, we even try and bring in some of the lean concepts to help during the implementation. So excited to have you with us, and it is an exciting topic. It's much more exciting than General Ledger. Was not in a civil war, in case you wanted to know that.
Oh my goodness! That's all right, look at that. We didn't even get off the presenter slide, and John has a joke. All right, so
yeah.
Let's talk about our agenda.
Muted. Unmuted.
We're going to talk
muted. Unmuted.
All right, I'm going to try again. I keep getting muted here. We're going to talk about the scheduling process, how we can build capacity for our work centers and machine centers, how we can then do shop loading to those work centers and machine centers, and then also finite loading. What can you do in BC to finite load work centers and machine centers? So let's first, maybe John, you can talk about a little bit about this day-to-day process of scheduling.
Yeah, when I think about what, you know, I'm a planner, so I'm scheduling. You know, like today is Tuesday. I might be scheduling Thursday's work, or Fridays, or maybe I schedule a week at a time. But just from a high level, what is the typical process we see for launching and scheduling work? Obviously, you know, good inventory is important. Dates are important, and with production, a routing, which is used to budget the time that it's going to take and give us a start and end time that is not so much the exact time is important, but what day we need to run and how long it takes to run. Because oftentimes as a planner, I'm looking at start dates. I'm looking at, I might pull in, show me all the firm plan production orders are going to start that need to start next week, look at the whole week, and then I'm managing which ones I check on to make sure things are good. And what this slide here talks about a planner's day kind of. So, it starts with running the planning worksheet. So in there is, all the suggested changes, and maybe it's just the MPS orders I'm working on, meaning it's not the raw materials. I'm concerned with the finished items more so, getting those production orders created, quantities, due dates, etc. And if I have a little more complex production order, meaning I have 2-3 levels to it, I might have a top level, and underneath that is a mix I might have to make in order to complete the top level, or it's just a complex. How do I work in a planning worksheet? Customers will start with something called the low level code. So I might look at all production orders at low level code 0, which is my top level. So I'm now just focusing on them, understanding when the due date comes from maybe sales order, it might come from a reorder policy, but I'm trying to figure out to create the production order on that due date that I need to have it done. And once I have that square and have launched that order, there's something called a change, which might be useful, but I would process maybe level code 1s then. So I'm looking at low level code 1 production orders that now might have been impacted by changing something on the top level, because in my planning worksheet, I'm going to see all the different levels of my production orders. And depending on how it's presented, I need to manage that in a logical fashion. So again, once I have my production orders created for the day, I then might do a quick review of what did I do to my schedule? What work centers machines are overloaded? Might have to juggle something around even further. And when that's all reasonable, before I turn it over to purchasing, I would definitely run a net change, which gets purchasing all in sync with what I just did in the hour or two that I did creating all my work orders. So there's kind of a logical flow to using the data that you build, and starts with the production orders, typically the top level production orders, and then you work your way through, eventually then providing purchasing to support what I just did as a planner, because I might have deleted some, I might have changed quantities, I might have changed due dates. I need my purchasing to be in sync with what I just did. That's kind of a high level of a day in the life of a planner, kind of utilizing the tools you have in BC/Nav. And any questions are welcome at any time to go through anything that we bring up.
All right, so first, what do we need to set up to build our capacities on our work centers and our machine centers to start tracking that load against those? A few setup items that we can do. One is capacity units to measure. So we need to define the units to measure in which our work centers and machine centers are managed. The 3 common ones are minutes, hours, and days. So that would be the first thing we'd want to set up. Also work shifts. So work shifts are used by the shop calendars. They're going to identify our hours for the work shifts. And this gives you the ability to see your availability and efficiency by not only work and machine centers, but then also by these work shifts as well. Then we, of course, have the shop calendars. So this is going to define our standard work weeks. Okay, so we would, as you can see here, we've set up a base calendar, Monday through Friday, 2 shifts. On the right side, you see our working days. So you can see each day we have a 7 to 3 p.m. is my work shift 1, and 3 to 11 is my work shift 2. We can also set up our holidays. So what days are we not working? So we can make sure that we keep capacity off of those days or times as well. So your shop calendars will then determine your gross available capacity for your different work centers and machine centers.
And just one comment on that. Some customers will take lunch breaks out of this. And a general comment is, well, while the system schedules like start this job at 7:30 and it ends at 4 in the afternoon, we don't have, a lot of customers are more interested in what's the start date and end date. So when I'm the planner, I'm looking at, I want to see all the production orders that are firm planned that need to start like next week, Monday through the end of the week, and get a view of that, because often when you're launching the work to the floor, you may be combining production orders, you may be needing to grab a production order to fill a machine that there's capacity, and we got to keep somebody busy. So those kind of things come into play when you're working with the dates and whatnot. The actual start time of the order, less important. It's the start date and end date. If you're just starting with trying to understand your capacity planning and whatnot, particularly if you have longer runtime jobs that are on the floor for multiple days, it's important to have a view into that in the future. So, you know, I need to start it by next Tuesday in order to get it done by the due date that sales needs it by. Is a great example of that. So you could put your breaks in here if you wanted to take them out and you have no production, like in an 8-hour day, maybe there's a half-hour lunch break that you'd want to take out of that. So only schedule 7.5 hours or something. But each company has their own difference of what they might do or requirement.
All right. So then, John, maybe just a little bit about the setups for scheduling on the Work Center card.
Sure.
What fields are important?
Yeah, I mean, your work centers and determine the unit and measure code is important. We like to set it up in hours. The reason being is when I, as a planner, look at the load on a work center, I'd prefer to see like 12.5 hours on Thursday versus 728 minutes or something. Because whatever you set here is good for to view the load. You can go to the work center, look at the load, you can run some reports, and it'll always be in hours. And I also, the hours supports when I'm doing a routing. I don't know if people were in our routing session, but you can set your routing up to basically say how many pieces can I do in an hour, for instance. That might be a very simple approach. And it gets the time from the work center. So when I create that route step, it'll say, oh, in 1 hour I can do 212 pieces on this operation, or 150 pieces on this operation. So you get away from the, now let's see, we can do one, and we can do 260 divided by 220. That means it takes me 0.10356 to do one. I like to see, or we like to see, oh, in 1 hour I can do 220. It's pretty easy for somebody to review that and understand, are we hitting 220 versus, you can get there, but you have to recalculate it. So having it in hours defaults to routing when I start building my routings. And then you also assign the shop calendar. The capacity here is important, depending if you strictly use machine center or work centers or machine centers. And all that's really saying is if this was a mixer here, and I have 3 mixers in my work center, it will calculate, if they were open 8 hours, 24 hours of capacity in that work center. So when I launch my orders, if I look at I'm reviewing this work center, I could see, oh, we have 24 hours capacity. I've just scheduled 28 hours, so I need to do something. Or I've scheduled 12, we've got capacity. So that capacity is used there. However, it's overridden if you mark that consolidated calendar, meaning I don't get my capacity from the work center, I get it from the machines assigned to this work center. So when you look at the hours available to load, it adds up. In this case, we have 3 machines. I would add those 3 hours together to possibly come up with 28, or maybe one of those machines is only open 4 hours, somewhere less of 28. So a consolidated calendar adds up the machines that are associated with to come up what's available. Efficiency, I get asked about. It's basically how many hours out of that when I'm open do I want to be able to schedule? And I usually encourage you to start with 100 until you get your arms around what it's doing and how it's scheduled. But if this was open, let's say it was open 10 hours, and I only had one capacity, and I had 90% in there, it would only schedule 9 of the 10 hours. So it's a way to build a little bit of buffer in there. But when you start out, I encourage you to go with 100% and understand what it's doing. But that's how you would reduce the calendar versus going into the calendar and changing the only putting 7 hours in the calendar or 9 hours per day. You should leave it at 10 and you can use the efficiency here. There's a shop calendar code that you can have multiple calendars, meaning certain work centers could be working 2 shifts versus 1. And then it just says, hey, your capacity is 16 hours instead of 8. Pretty simple there. Calendar rounding, we usually recommend if you were going with hours. I just want to see two positions. I want to see that we've loaded, 12.25 hours, not 12.25, 1, 2, 3 hours. It's just a easier way to look at the data. And then there is a queue time on here, and this would be the wait time before the operation could start. We've seen that used a few times, mostly in a process in the food where they might have to have a clean operation in between processes before they run it. Obviously, the planner is trying to, I'll keep it simple, let's say it's an allergen, they're trying to run, there's an ice cream company we worked with it, and they want to run all the product with no allergens first, all the way through to the peanut allergen, let's say. But if for some reason it got ran out of sequence, somebody did something, obviously they have to clean the setup now. Queue time is available, don't have to use it. I think when you start off, unless you have a really unique situation, I haven't seen queue time used a lot on the work center. That'll build before I can start this in between operation 10 and 20 for this work center, I need a half hour of queue time. It would build that into the start and end time for the production order.
John, one question. On the schedule, do you specify certain times for break or lunch, or do you just short the total hours when entering it?
It depends, of course, if you consider that production time. So if I'm open 8 hours, you could set up a break in there in the calendar. You actually put it right in the calendar from 10 to 10:15. So the first you'd work from 7 to 10, and then the next one would be from 10:15 to noon, and you might have a half-hour lunch. You can build that into the calendar. So in the end, you're telling the system how many hours can I schedule. And if you set it up, you got it. I mean, obviously, if you go forward, you have that for reasonableness of when do I need to start it, when I need to end it. If you have a lot of short-run jobs, that's probably what you want to do, because the planner is trying to figure out if you've got a bunch of jobs that take a couple hours or less. I'm trying to figure out how to put them on the floor, which ones are going to run in the morning, in the afternoon, that kind of thing. So it might make sense to do that.
Okay. All right. So moving on, if we look at, there's a few scheduling setups on the machine center as well. Basically the same setup, or is there anything different machine center versus work center?
Again, machine centers are a subset of the work center. In this example, we have a mixer is the work center, and then we have 3 mixers underneath. And why would you do that? Well, when I initially enter the order, I might not know what mixer I'm going to run it on. And and maybe when you first start, you don't necessarily care. You'll let the lead person do that. But if you're a planner and I'm scheduling work, I might, and we're going to go through a little bit later here. I would have multiple machine centers, and then before I release the production order to the floor, I would assign it to the machine I want it to run on. So another use for machine centers might be the people in that work center. You might have, let's say you have a machining operation. I have 10 employees with, I don't know, 15 different machines, and I'm trying to schedule those employees on the different machines to get the work through. I could say I have a 10 capacity of 10 in this people center, I'll call it. So it's a machine center, but it represents people. And if in my routing, I can call out, well, I need 2 people to run this job. I need a great example is more and more an operator will run 2 different machines, 2 different production orders. I don't want to charge an hour to both. So you're able to set up your routing to say, I want to charge, if it runs for 4 hours, maybe a half hour on this job and 2 hours on this one. You can set that up that way. It's a little more advanced, but you do have ability to schedule a machine and a second, and it's called parallel routing, a second operation which is parallel to the machine, but I'm telling it how many people that I need. And we have one customer who actually puts a setup person and 2 people to run it. And when they do their cost roll up, because they're, you know, their standard cost, or you can roll up with FIFO also, it gives you a better view of what is it costing me to run this part? Because I have overhead on the machine, and I have direct labor on the setup operator, who I need a half hour his time, but I need 4 hours of 2 people that are another direct labor cost. So you can get into all those kind of levels of detail to what I would call move this costing puzzle that typically we see offline into the system. And there's a, you know, it's all doable. It's just a matter of how do you want it, you know, how detailed do you want to go? Also on the machine center, it has an efficiency, so each machine can have its own efficiency. You talk about capacities, and if there's people, maybe there's 10 people I'm trying to schedule. And then a queue time. And also machines are used, let's say these were three mixers, different sizes. So I have a product that for cost buildup and whatnot, I always prefer to run it across 101 because that's the most efficient batch size. Or let's say it's a press, it's a 100-ton press. This part should go across a 50-ton press, not the 100. So in my routing, I referenced a 50-ton. But if I'm scheduling and I'm looking, maybe the 50-ton is booked, so I move it on the 100. Because what's the job of the planner? Get it done by the due date. So those kind of costs would be reflected in when you analyze the production order. How do we do? Because we have a plan and we have how we ran it, which could be 2 different things. And again, if you're standard costing, that variance would show up in production. If you're not standard costing, that would be on a report. But all those kind of things are part of the puzzle when you get into how am I going to use BC. And again, we encourage you to keep it simple, but realize you could do more if it fit what you were doing. So that's machine centers.
All right. And then finally, in the setups would be calculating your calendars. So you would want to make sure that you calculate both your work center and machine center calendars. That's something you have to do on a yearly basis as well to calculate for the following years in order to calculate the capacity for each day for the work center and machine centers. And John, if you're using work centers and machine centers, do you have to calculate one of those before the other, or does it matter?
That's a leading question, right? Of course, yes. Because if you remember on the work center, I've got that had that checkbox to say, get my capacity from my machine centers. So in your, what I usually encourage is part of your year-end procedures is like at the end of 2020 here, you'd be calculating your calendar for 2022. And then the sequence is do the machines first and then your work center second. Because if you have, like I mentioned, we had 3 mixers, that's going to roll up, calculate calendar, and then whatever that total is per day will be accumulated for the work center because I've got that checkbox to get my load from the machines. But yeah, it's one of those things where you just have to remember to calculate your calendars. A good clue is when I create my production, they're always due 12/31, and this has to be in January. What's going on? It could be you don't have the calendars loaded for the new year yet. I've seen that.
All right, so now that we have capacity on our work centers and machine centers, then the next question is how do we load them up? So let's look at capacity loading. So maybe John, if you could just talk about some of the concepts first.
Yeah, right. This is a kind of a just how the system loads capacity. So out of the box, BC/NAV assumes infinite, unlimited capacity. So what that means is treating each production order requirement by itself based on the due date and back scheduling from your end of shift on that day. Well, it's sort of the manufacturing setup, but it back schedules. So if there's operation 10, 20, 30, 40, it will say 40's got to be due by August 15th. And then if the next operation 40, well, that one still I can do on the 14th, and et cetera, et cetera. So it will back schedule and load even if that work center or machine is totally booked, it will still schedule that way. And a side part of this is planning also, for that also back schedules. So it's looking at the due date. That's the best date, and the due date is either the shipment date on the sales order. It could be a date calculated if this is a reorder policy, fixed reorder, and you've got a lead time on the item. You could use that. It could be from a transfer. It's always back scheduling from a date, and that's just keep that in mind. That's what it's doing. So if your dates are solid, and to me it all starts at the sales order. If that planned shipment date and shipment date are suspect, then you're fighting that all through planning. And we've seen all kinds of different things with customers. I had one customer, the planned shipment day was today. Every order came in, should go out today. And when I went there, I said, well, I didn't see a huge warehouse with all your finished product. But what they had done is put in a lot of processes to work around that because their planned shipment date was, unreasonable. And those are the kind of things that are good discussions just to understand. And I realize that planned shipment date could depend on your market, could depend on your competition, could depend on a lot of different things. So it's not as easy to say, hey, you know what, for every finished item, we'll just put 14 days out. That a lot of times doesn't apply because of your competition and the management's focus on every order going out of here in 3 days or whatever. And that opens up a lot of discussion on how long does it take an order from the time you take the order to the shop floor is one of the big gaps that we see. It could take 2 or 3 days to get out on the floor. Can you get that down to 1 day? Can you do all those kind of things? But loading the unlimited, just realize each production order is a standalone by itself. And they can be generated from a sales order. There is a link to actually create a production order from a sales order, and it's actually reserved. It doesn't look at inventory of the finished product. It just launches a production order and a link together. You can create a production order from the planning worksheet, as we talked about. You can enter it manually, of course. And then there's a replan on the production order. You may or may not use it. If you're running a planning worksheet, you might not use that. But if you're not, that allows you to create the sub items from the main production order and have them linked together. So that's another function that could be. So we've got lots of ways to create production orders, and just realize that it's unlimited capacity. And that's okay as long as we know how to manage that. Any questions on that, or I think we're good on that? Okay.
All right. So one way to look at what has been scheduled to a work center or a machine center is a task list. So located on both the work center and the machine center list and cards is the task list. So as soon as a firm planned or a released production order is created and the production order routing is on that production order, it will show up in the task list for that work center or the machine center. So it's scheduled out to your work center and machine center. And one thing that's important to note is the tasks stay until the task has been marked finished from the output journal or the production journal. So when you're posting time in the output journal or the production journal, you may have noticed that there's a finished checkbox. So if you mark that task or that operation step as finished, it will then be removed from this work center task list or machine center task list. And that's really important because let's say the runtime was an hour. Well, you have it done in 45 minutes. If you don't check mark that as finished, it'll still think there's another 15 minutes to run on that work center or machine center in the task list. But if you do mark it finished because you are done, it will remove that from your task list and your load, as we'll talk about in a little bit. Anything?
I'll add to that a little bit is we get questions from customers, how do I know where I'm at on a production order, right? That might be a reasonable question. One method is you can expose that status on the routing and look at it, go, oh, we have 4 operation steps, first 2 are done, because they're finished, they're marked finished. Otherwise, it's going to say in process. But again, that's if we're recording time, and more and more customers are moving away from recording the actual time and back flushing time based on your standard. That's a more efficient way to do it, assuming your standard is accurate. And you don't have piecework, for instance, that might not support it. But different ways to look at how do I know where I'm at on this longer running production order. If I have one on the floor for, I had one customer, I asked him, we just started working, what's a long running production order for you? And he looked at me and said, 2 years. Which I thought, 2 years, holy cow. But what it really was is that same machine ran that same part, but they did it in week increments. So it wasn't like that production order was open for 2 years, but it was kind of an interesting discussion. The other thing that this list here is about as close as BCNav has to a dispatch list without a ISV add-on. In other words, at this work center, what's the order of work I should do? That's as close as we have to a for real dispatch list. Just FYI kind of thing.
All right. All right, so let's take a look at the load screen. We're looking at a work center load. Again, this is available on the work center and the machine center. But here, you can view this by any time period. We have it shown by day. And what this shows us is it reflects the time that's remaining on released production orders. So this is a little bit different than the task list. Task list will show us firm plan and release production orders scheduled to the work center or machine center. This will show us the time remaining on release production orders for a certain time period. So if we just look at the columns available, what information is available here? One, we see the capacity. So that's the gross available capacity for this worker machine center. Then we see the allocated quantity. So this is going to show us all the requirements of all the production orders except for simulated that is allocated to this work center, machine center. What's the availability after that allocation? And then it'll show us a load, which is really a percent. It's a percent of that allocated versus capacity. And one thing that's also nice about this screen is both the capacity and the allocated quantity columns are, you can drill down on those numbers. So if you want to see the detail behind those numbers, you can just click on the number and drill down and see that detail.
There's one spot that, or one type of order that not a lot of customers are doing, but let's say that you had sales come in and talk about potential some large orders that were going to come in. What's that going to do to production? You can actually create a planned production order. It's not firm planned or released, and it would show up in these loads, and you could see, well, you know, if we start that in August, and whatever it would give me, you know what, I've got a problem on the second week of August. We just don't have capacity. You could do those kind of things, because planned production orders are intended for the planner to, it's mostly a focus on time that I might need for a special project, or some additional load that was unexpected. What's it going to do to me for future analysis? Because planned production orders will get deleted when I run planning, the regen. It's just delete those. So that's what those planned production orders could be used for when I look at this.
All right. So our next slide here kind of shows us an example of loading capacities. So at the top of the screen here, we see a production order routing. All right, so if you look at the first three lines, we have them highlighted with a red box around them. For Work Center 100, we have an expected capacity of 1.2. So now if you look down to our lower screenshot of the Work Center load, you can see on 1124, we have an allocated quantity of 1.2 that makes up those three lines from this production order routing. And again, just like we mentioned earlier, it does stay on the task list and the load until it's marked finished in the output journal or the production journal.
And one hidden thing in here that isn't obvious, but if you notice, the first three lines are all the same work center. And that's a good use for the task list, because now I can say, I want to keep all those hours in Work Center 100. I don't want to create extra work centers to do tool setup or QA. So just by changing the task code on the routing, it's in 100, but what are you doing in 100 if you needed to go that deep? So that's a good use for the task code, is rather than setting up another work center, because I do want to see all the hours that we're booking on in Work Center 100 together. I don't want to create a second work center if I don't have to. And this is a good example of that. I've got three.
All right, we'll see if he comes back. I'll move to the next slide for now, and we'll talk about the move function. And if he comes back, we can move back one slide here. Okay, so one of the things you can also do with both Work Center and Machine Centers is do a move function. So for an example, you've set up the production order routing to the Work Center mixer. but you want to wait and assign them to specific mixers at the time of scheduling. So if you can see my screen here, I am looking at a released production order number 92. It's assigned to the Work Center mixer. And if you go to Functions, Move, you can select a machine center to move that task to, and then it will move it over to the machine center task list, and then it will be specific to that machine center. So another good function for this is if you're looking at the load and you see that one machine center is overloaded, then you can move that task off that machine center and maybe move it to another machine center that's not as overloaded. All right, let's see if John's back. Are you back, John?
I am. We had a lightning knock me out.
Okay, yeah, Angie said she went offline as well, so.
I must have said something that really wasn't true, so hopefully
lightning struck?
Yeah, well, yeah, nobody recorded that, so anyway.
Did you have anything more on loading of capacities?
No, it's really, you know, you're looking for as a planner, where am I in trouble? That's really what you're doing. And that we'll show a report at the end that helps with that whole thought process.
Okay, so while lightning struck, we talked about how you can use the move function to move tasks from a work center, for example, to a machine center, or if you had an overloaded machine center, you could move it from one to the other. Any other information on that you would like to add?
Yeah, what's kind of nice about if you're working in that, it does update the production order. So rather than going into the production order and changing the work center to the machine you're going to run it on, you can use the from the work center, see all the different production orders, and then basically assign the machine, drops off your list, it updates the production order, go on to the next one, that kind of thing. Particularly when you're trying to balance, like I mentioned, my routing will say a work center because I don't know what mixer I'm going to run it on. So as a planner, when I'm getting close, I'm looking at Monday's run, for instance, or Fridays, I pull in those production orders and look at that work center, and if my process supports it, I would you know, assign it to the right machine in that what Jenny went through. That's one way to do it. Yep. That's all I got.
All right. This is just an example of the effect on the load when you're posting labor. And again, going back to that finish checkbox in the output and production journals. Okay, so if you look at the top screenshot, we have the production order routing. That's a half-hour setup time, 1 hour run time on 11/4, so that's an hour and a half. So on the left side of the screen, you see the mixer's load, allocated quantity is an hour and a half. And the right side of the screen is after posting labor in the output journal. And we check marked that finish field. So you can see because we check marked the finish field, the allocated quantity is now 0. But again, if we had posted 1 hour and not check mark that field, it would still show that we have an allocated quantity of a half hour yet to run on this production order routing. So that field in the journals is pretty important to make sure your loads and your capacities are correct. All right, and then finally, maybe John, if you want to talk a little bit about, we know BC and NAV is infinite loading, but what could we do for finite loading?
Yeah, finite loading is an interesting topic because BC NAV does have a ability to schedule a work center finitely, meaning I launch my order, it books 8 hours on this work center, another order comes in with the same date, or if you know it won't schedule on top of it like Infinite does. The biggest difference is it's forward scheduling. So in your process, there can be gaps that don't support what you do. An example would be, I have a production order that's due tomorrow for 6 hours, so it'll forward schedule tomorrow 6 hours. I have another order that's that the day after it's due, so it's scheduled 6 hours also. And now I have another order coming in that's due tomorrow. Well, it looks at, I'm forward scheduling, it looks at the load and says, oh, I could schedule 2 hours tomorrow, and the next day, oh, I could do another 2, and then 4 hours on the last day if I could hit my due date. But in the production process, you seldom start a work order and stop it. That kind of thinking. So finite loading is one of those to really look at, and it might just be your bottleneck work center you work on, one work center. But if you understand how it works, it could be that we could, you could develop a process that supports that. But the splitting up of the same production order to run some on, Wednesday and some on Thursday, and not consecutive, isn't desirable in most situations. But you do have it; it's part of the product. It might fit in certain situations, and it's called capacity constraint. And if you search for that, you'll find where you can set up a work center. And like here, we have an example of where it did actually move the production order. It didn't go on top of it. And then there's also dampeners to say out of a 8-hour day, we have a, let's say you're capital equipment and you have a break fix division, so you're always having customer service, emergency type replacement parts. You probably won't want to book solid your production on a CNC machine for 8 hours. You leave a little bit for those rush orders that happen in kind of capital equipment break fix emergency orders. So you have that ability to build that into the work center and finite loading to save some capacity for special situations.
All right. So finally, are there any useful reports that we could use for capacity and load? Yeah, there's a couple. There's a few. We have the capacity task list, and you can filter this by work center or machine center. You can filter it by date. This is basically just a report printout of your task list that you see on screen for your work center and machine centers.
Yeah, this would be a dispatch list again. If other softwares would call it a dispatch list, and that's kind of the best we have in DC without a custom report.
And then the second report is either there's two, a work center load and a machine center load. So this allows you to enter a starting date and how many periods you want to view, and then it will show you that load for each work or machine center. And again, this is a report view of the load screens, the on-screen views.
And as a planner, this is exactly this one's decent because I remember I'm running a planning worksheet. I'm creating my production orders in a organized method. When I'm done creating them, I want to look at what did I just do to my schedule. And you could run this to show me all the work centers that are 80% or more loaded. And then I still might juggle some things around. Then I take my planning worksheet, run the net change to get purchasing in sync with the dates I have, and then turn it over to purchasing. So this is a pretty decent report to give me a heads up on what did I just do to my schedule. And it may be that you're looking at a couple work centers or machine centers that are, as the theory of constraints would say, those are the ones you want to focus on. It's your Herbie. Anybody read the book about Herbie? Let me know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. I've not read it.
It's the old story. Quickly, you know, I'm a Boy Scout leader, and Herbie is the kid. He's at the back of the line, and then we start walking, and pretty soon Herbie's lost almost. So wait, where should I put him? I'll put him in the middle, and of course the middle pack gets lost. Our pace of work, TAC time in TAKT time, is Herbie at the front of the line. That's the fastest I can go because that's my work center. That is my constraint. That's the theory of constraints in a sadly described version. So anyway, that's Herbie.
All right. How about ISV solutions? Are there any third-party add-ons that could be useful to us for scheduling or shop loading?
And I'll pick this up for a second here. You probably heard it. First of all, I'm going to Netronics. Again, it's doing that. I'll call it a drag and drop. You know how Jenny showed. Oh, I've got a work center. I'm going to assign the mixer. I can go to the work center, go to the task list, and move this to mixer 3. Move this to mixer 2. There are a few add-ons that allow you to dynamically do that with a drag and drop. Netronics is one of them. You know, I can go to that production order, and from that work center, I can actually assign it to the machine right in that view. InsightWorks also has shop floor insight, which is much more than the drag and drop, I will say. But they do have within their product ability to see what you just did from a dynamic screen, looking at what did I just do, and then you can move things around. You can you know, drag a production order, move it out 2 days or in 1 day, and those dates will get updated, and those kind of things happen. And then the InsightWorks, and this is really the we have a few customers that they're pretty advanced. When I get 20 new production orders, I want to lay it in the schedule. I want it optimized. I want the system to do that based on my rules. It might be by you know, combined tooling. It might be I have allergens in my product, and I want to, or colors, and I want all the white to run first, and then all the way to dark. Some constraints you have that as a planner, I know them, but BC/NAV doesn't really have a way to do that. To me, those optimization are the really advanced technical products. Insight has this MX APS. For example, it's running at some Honda plant, is what I've been told. So it's not a little effort. It's like, you know, you'd have to have people dedicated to it. But the thought is, it is optimizing setups. It is optimizing allergens, colors, different things that if we can do that, we're going to save money on our production, which equates to more profits. And setup is a huge one. Now, there was the single minute exchange of die. I don't know if people have heard of that, but that was a, you know, people wanted to do that because if I can change over a machine in 10 minutes or less, then I don't really care what order I run the products in. So that's the other way to look at it is, you know, and again, lots of different thought processes, but think of InsightWorks, there's an advanced scheduling that tries to optimize. Simple Netronics drag and drop just is on the schedule. It works with jobs as well as production, as well as, I think it even works with the resources if you're into that. And then InsightWorks shop floor actually allows you to capture labor, has online dispatches, report quality, and in there is a visual drag and drop scheduler with decent functionality. So those optimized ISV solutions are great. I encourage you to understand what you get out of the box and work with it. So when you see these products, your questions are going to be more on your process and what you'd like to do versus just learning for the first time. Oh, well, that's what that does. I found that if you understand what BC does out of the box, you get a much more targeted questions of your process and what you need. And I know that Summit is not going to, well, I'd be shocked if it was in person, but that's typically where you get a chance to see all these different ISVs together in one room and walk around and ask the tough questions.
All right, 2 minutes to spare. Any additional questions that anyone has?
Why's your question mark look so strange?
Sorry, Novia font, I'm not sure.
Any questions at all?
If you don't have any now, John would be happy to answer any questions.
Email, sure.
Email him, call him. He's our resident expert in manufacturing here.
Try to be, but we're, we'll get you the resource. If I can't answer, we'll get you the answer.
All right, I'll hand it back to Angie then. I know she went out. I think the lightning struck you and her at the same time in 2 different states. All right, well, I'll try to do my best ending this for her, but if you want to check out all of our upcoming events and webinars, just go to inovia.com/events. And we thank you all for joining us.
Hey, we had a new netbook that, or Surface that nobody asked any questions. You would have won it if you asked one question, but we'll keep it.
John, he's joking. All right, anyways, thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks everybody.